The morning sun painted the Texas plains in shades of gold and amber as Elena Martinez stepped out of her family's modest adobe home. Her dark hair caught the light as she shaded her eyes, scanning the horizon for any sign of dust clouds that might signal approaching riders. It had been 3 weeks since Captain James Sullivan had ridden out with his cavalry unit, promising to return before the harvest moon to make her his wife. Elena's heart fluttered with the same mixture of excitement and worry that had consumed her since James had first asked for her hand. She was 22, considered by many in their small settlement of San Angelo to be past the usual marrying age, but James had seen something special in her that others had missed. Perhaps it was her fierce independence, inherited from her Mexican father who had taught her to shoot straight and think for herself. Or maybe it was the gentle compassion she showed to everyone, from the oldest settler to the newest arrival, seeking refuge from whatever troubles had driven them west. Elena, Mija, come help with the washing, called her mother, Isabella, from behind the house where she was already bent over the large wooden tub, scrubbing clothes against the washboard with practiced efficiency. Elena reluctantly turned away from her vigil and joined her mother. The work was familiar and soothing, the rhythmic motion of washing clothes helping to calm her restless thoughts. Isabella had been unusually quiet since James left, and Elena could see the worry lines etched deeper around her mother's eyes. "Mama, what troubles you?" Elena asked, wringing out one of her father's work shirts. Isabella paused in her scrubbing and looked toward the horizon where her daughter had been searching moments before. "I have lived in this land for many years, Elena. I have seen good men leave and never return. I have seen promises broken by death, by distance, by the harsh realities of this frontier life." "James is different," Elena said, though she heard the uncertainty in her own voice. "Perhaps," Isabella replied softly. "But the Comanche have been restless lately. The traders who came through last week spoke of increased raids to the north. And there are other dangers out there, Mija, men who wear badges but have forgotten their honor." Elena's father, Miguel Martinez, had been one of the first Mexican settlers to make peace with the arriving Anglo families, offering his knowledge of the land and his skills as a blacksmith to help build the growing community. He had worked alongside James's father years ago, before the older Sullivan died of fever, and had watched James grow from a headstrong boy into a man of principle. When James asked for Elena's hand, Miguel had given his blessing readily, seeing in the young cavalry officer the kind of steady character that could provide security in an uncertain world. But Miguel had also warned his daughter about the complexities of their situation. A Mexican woman marrying an Anglo cavalry officer would face scrutiny from both communities. There would be those who questioned James's motives and others who doubted Elena's loyalty to her own people. The marriage would require strength from both of them to weather the storms that were sure to come. As the day wore on, Elena found herself drawn repeatedly to the small mirror in her bedroom, studying her reflection as if seeing herself for the first time. Her dark eyes held intelligence and determination, qualities that James said he admired above her physical beauty. Her skin, bronzed by the Texas sun, bore the evidence of a life lived outdoors, helping with ranch work and tending the family's vegetable garden. She was not the delicate flower that some men preferred, but James had told her that he wanted a partner, not an ornament. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made Elena's heart leap. She rushed to the front window, pushing aside the rough-spun curtains her mother had made from feed sacks. 3 riders were approaching, but even at a distance, she could tell they were not James and his men. These riders moved with a different purpose, their horses lathered with sweat as if they had been riding hard for many miles. Miguel emerged from his blacksmith shop behind the house, wiping his hands on his leather apron as he squinted at the approaching men. Elena could see the tension in her father's shoulders, the way his hand instinctively moved toward the pistol he kept at his side when strangers approached. The lead rider was a tall man with a badge glinting on his vest and a hard face that spoke of years spent in the saddle. His companions flanked him as they drew near the Martinez home, their eyes scanning the property with the calculating gaze of men accustomed to taking what they wanted. "You Miguel Martinez?" the lead rider called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "I am," Miguel replied, stepping forward but keeping his distance. "What brings you to my home?" "I'm Marshal Wade Garrett," the man said, dismounting from his horse with practiced ease. "This here is Deputy Carson and Deputy Blake." We're tracking some stolen cavalry horses, and word is they might have passed through this area. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard stories about marshals who operated in the gray areas of the law, men who used their badges to justify actions that would otherwise be considered theft or worse. But she also knew that her father had done nothing wrong, and surely these lawmen would conduct their business and move on. I have seen no stolen horses, Miguel said carefully. My family and I keep to ourselves and our own business. Marshal Garrett's eyes moved past Miguel to where Elena stood in the doorway, his gaze lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. That your daughter? Elena is my daughter. Yes, Miguel replied, his voice taking on a protective edge. Pretty thing, Garrett said with a smile that held no warmth. Mexican girls often know things their fathers don't. Maybe she's seen something. Elena felt her mother's presence behind her, Isabella's protective instincts bringing her to stand beside her daughter. The two women remained silent, but Elena could feel the tension radiating from her mother's small frame. My daughter knows nothing of stolen horses, Miguel said firmly. If you wish to search our property, I cannot stop you, but you will find nothing here that does not belong to us. Garrett nodded slowly, but his attention remained focused on Elena. We'll have a look around, just to be thorough. Carson, check the barn and the corral. Blake, take a walk around back and see if there's anything interesting. As the deputies began their search, Garrett remained mounted, his position giving him a clear view of the family. Elena could feel his eyes on her, and fought the urge to retreat into the house. She had done nothing wrong, and she would not cower before this man's intimidating presence. Your daughter spoken for? Garrett asked suddenly, his question directed at Miguel, but his eyes still on Elena. Miguel's jaw tightened. Elena is betrothed to Captain James Sullivan of the cavalry. Sullivan, Garrett repeated thoughtfully. Can't say I know him. Of course, cavalry officers come and go out here. A lot of them don't make it back from their patrols. The casual cruelty of his words hit Elena like a physical blow. She stepped forward, no longer willing to remain silent. Captain Sullivan is an honorable man who serves his country with distinction. He will return as he promised. Garrett's smile widened, and Elena immediately regretted speaking. Spirit, I like that in a woman. Shows she's got fire that can be tamed. Miguel moved protectively in front of his daughter. Marshal, if you are finished with your search, perhaps it is time for you to move on. Not quite finished, Garrett said, dismounting from his horse. See, there's something else we're investigating. Reports of Mexican families in this area providing aid and comfort to Comanche raiders. Serious charges that could result in some unfortunate consequences for those involved. Elena's blood ran cold. She knew these accusations were false. Her family had never had any contact with the Comanche except for occasional trading interactions that were common throughout the region. But she also knew that in the current climate of fear and suspicion, accusations alone could be enough to destroy a family's reputation and livelihood. That is a lie, Miguel said, his voice steady despite the danger they now faced. We have never aided raiders of any kind. Maybe not, Garrett conceded with a shrug. But proving innocence can be difficult when evidence has a way of appearing. Of course, cooperation from the local community can sometimes help clear up these misunderstandings. The threat was clear, though not explicitly stated. Elena felt her world beginning to crumble around her as she realized what this man was suggesting. Her family's safety, their reputation, their very livelihood hung in the balance of this corrupt marshal's whims. What kind of cooperation? Miguel asked quietly, though Elena could see in his eyes that he already understood. Garrett's gaze returned to Elena, his meaning unmistakable. The kind that shows a family's true loyalty to the proper authorities. Sometimes a man's word isn't enough. Sometimes more personal assurances are required. Elena felt sick to her stomach as the full implications of his words sank in. This man was suggesting that she could secure her family's safety by submitting to his advances, betraying her promise to James, and sacrificing her honor to protect those she loved. The deputies returned from their search, confirming what Miguel had already told them. There was nothing suspicious on the property. But Elena could see that their failure to find evidence of wrongdoing had not deterred Garrett from his true purpose. We'll be staying in the area for a few days, Garrett announced, remounting his horse. Continuing our investigation. I'm sure we'll have occasion to speak with your family again soon. As the three men rode away, Elena felt her legs give out beneath her. She sank to her knees in the dust, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the threat they now faced. Her father knelt beside her, gathering her into his arms as her mother joined them. "We will not let them hurt you, Mija," Miguel whispered fiercely. "I will die before I let that man touch you." But Elena could hear the helplessness in her father's voice, could see the fear in her mother's eyes. They were a family of honest, hard-working people who had built their life through determination and integrity. They were not equipped to fight the kind of systematic corruption that Marshal Garrett represented. That evening, as the family sat around their simple wooden table sharing a meal that none of them could properly taste, Elena made a decision that would change everything. If James did not return soon, if he could not protect her from Garrett's threats, then she would have to find another way to save her family. The harvest moon was rising, full and bright, casting long shadows across the Texas plains. Somewhere out there, James Sullivan was riding toward his wedding, unaware that the woman he loved was being hunted by predators who wore the badge of law but served only their own twisted desires. And in the darkness beyond the settlement, other eyes watched and waited. Comanche warriors had indeed been moving through the territory, but not for the reasons the settlers feared. Among them rode a man whose very name struck terror into the hearts of his enemies, a warrior whose reputation for both fury and honor had spread across the frontier like wildfire. Elena Martinez had no way of knowing that her fate would soon become entangled with that of the most feared Comanche war chief in all of Texas. She could not imagine that her salvation would come not from the cavalry officer who had promised to marry her, but from a man her people had been taught to consider their greatest enemy. As she lay in her narrow bed that night, listening to the sounds of the prairie and praying for James's safe return, Elena could not foresee the extraordinary chain of events that would soon unfold. She did not know that within days, she would be forced to choose between her safety and her honor, between her family's survival and her own freedom. The wind carried the scent of sage and distant storms across the plains, and with it came the whisper of destiny approaching on silent hooves. Change was coming to San Angelo, and Elena Martinez would find herself at the center of a story that would be told around campfires and in parlors for generations to come. 3 days had passed since Marshal Garrett's first visit, and the tension in the Martinez household had grown thick as molasses. Elena found herself jumping at every sound, her nerves frayed by the constant fear that the corrupt lawman would return to make good on his implied threats. Her father had taken to keeping his rifle close at hand, and her mother had barely spoken except to murmur prayers in Spanish when she thought no one was listening. On the fourth morning, Elena was hanging laundry behind the house when she noticed movement on the distant ridge. Her heart raced as she recognized the silhouettes of 3 riders approaching from the same direction Garrett had come before. But as they drew closer, she realized with relief that these were different men entirely. The lead rider was older, with silver hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades spent under the Texas sun. His companions appeared to be townspeople rather than lawmen, and as they approached, Elena could see the concern etched in their expressions. "Miguel," the lead rider called out as he dismounted near the blacksmith shop. "We need to talk." Elena's father emerged from his workshop, wiping his hands clean as he greeted the visitors. The older man was Thomas Brennan, one of the founding members of San Angelo, and a respected voice in the community. With him were Dr. Samuel Hayes, the settlement's only physician, and Robert Chun, a merchant who had arrived from California the previous year. "Thomas, what brings you out here?" Miguel asked, though Elena could see in her father's posture that he suspected the answer. "Word's been spreading, Miguel," Brennan said gravely. "Marshal Garrett's been asking questions around town about your family, specifically about Elena and her associations." Dr. Hayes stepped forward, his kind face troubled. "Miguel, I've known you and your family since you first settled here. You're good people, and this community is better for having you. But Garrett's stirring up old fears and prejudices. Some folks are starting to listen." Elena moved closer, no longer caring if she was seen eavesdropping. This conversation concerned her directly, and she had a right to hear what was being said. "What kind of questions?" Miguel asked, though his tone suggested he already feared the answer. "He's suggesting that your family might have connections to Comanche raiders," Chin said quietly. "Claims he has evidence that weapons and supplies have been passed through here to hostile tribes." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. The accusation was not only false, but potentially deadly. In a territory where raids and counter-raids had claimed so many lives, being labeled as a collaborator with hostile tribes could result in vigilante justice that no badge or court would question. That's a damn lie, Miguel said fiercely. We've never had any dealings with raiders of any kind. We know that, Brennan assured him. But Garrett's got some folks worked up. He's particularly focused on Elena, suggesting that her engagement to Captain Sullivan is some kind of cover for passing information to the Comanche. Elena stepped into view, no longer able to remain silent. That's insane. James is a cavalry officer dedicated to protecting this territory from raiders. Why would I jeopardize his mission or endanger his life? Dr. Hayes looked at her with sympathy. Elena, rational thinking isn't driving these accusations. Garrett's exploiting the fear and suspicion that already exists. Some people want to believe the worst because it gives them someone to blame for their troubles. What do you recommend we do? Miguel asked. Brennan hesitated before answering. Honestly, I think you should consider leaving, at least temporarily. Take Elena somewhere safe until this blows over. Run away, Elena said, her voice rising with indignation. Leave our home, our livelihood, everything we've built here because of one corrupt man's lies? Sometimes strategic retreat is the wisest course, Chen said gently. I've seen what happens when accusations like this take root in a community's mind. Truth becomes irrelevant when fear takes control. Miguel shook his head slowly. This is our home. We have done nothing wrong. We will not be driven away by lies and intimidation. Elena felt a surge of pride at her father's words, but also a growing dread. She could see the resolve in his eyes, the stubborn dignity that refused to bow to threats and false accusations. It was a quality she admired deeply, but she also feared it might cost them everything. After the men left, promising to do what they could to counter Garrett's influence in town, Elena found herself alone with her fears. James had been gone for nearly a month now, far longer than his original mission was supposed to last. Each passing day without word increased her worry that something terrible had happened to him. As afternoon faded into evening, Elena was preparing dinner when the sound of approaching horses made her stomach clench with dread. Through the window, she could see not 3 riders this time, but 6. Marshal Garrett had returned with reinforcements. Elena, go to your room, Miguel ordered. But she shook her head. No, Papa. Whatever happens, we face it together as a family. Isabella emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on her apron, her face pale, but determined. Miguel is right, Mija. This is not something you should see. But Elena had already made up her mind. She had spent 3 days hiding in fear, and she was done being a victim of other people's evil intentions. If Garrett wanted to destroy her family, he would have to do it while looking her in the eyes. The marshal dismounted with the same casual arrogance he had displayed before, but this time his companions were not just his usual deputies. Elena recognized 2 of the men as townspeople who had always viewed her family with suspicion. Pete Crawford, a failed rancher who blamed everyone but himself for his troubles, and Jake Morrison, a drunk who had been rejected by every decent woman in the territory. Evening, Martinez, Garrett said, his voice carrying false friendliness. I'm afraid I have some unpleasant business to discuss with you. Miguel stepped forward, positioning himself between the marshal and his family. What business is that? Garrett pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. Got myself a warrant here. Seems some evidence has come to light regarding your family's activities. Specifically, evidence of providing aid to hostile Indians. Elena felt her mother's sharp intake of breath, but she forced herself to remain calm. What evidence? She demanded, ignoring her parents' attempts to quiet her. Garrett's cold eyes fixed on her face. Well now, Miss Martinez, that's an interesting question. Pete here saw your family meeting with a group of Indians just last week. Passed them supplies and information about cavalry movements. Crawford stepped forward, avoiding Elena's eyes as he spoke. That's right, Marshal. Saw it clear as day. The girl that was talking to a Comanche brave, real friendly-like. Elena stared at the man in disbelief. That's a complete fabrication. I haven't spoken to any Indians, and I certainly haven't passed any information about anything to anyone. Your word against his, Garrett said with a shrug. And Pete here's a respected member of this community. Got witnesses, too. Morrison nodded eagerly. Seen it myself. Real suspicious behavior. Elena realized with growing horror that she was witnessing the construction of a complete lie built by men who were either being paid by Garrett or who harbored their own reasons for wanting her family destroyed. The casual way they were destroying her family's reputation and potentially their lives was breathtaking in its evil. "This is preposterous," Miguel said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "These men are lying, and you know it." "Maybe," Garrett conceded, "but I got a warrant that says otherwise. And that means I got authority to search your property thoroughly, question your family extensively, and, if necessary, take them into custody for further investigation." Elena felt the trap closing around them. She could see the calculation in Garrett's eyes, the way he was savoring their helplessness. He had manufactured a crisis that gave him the legal authority to do whatever he wanted, and there was no higher authority to appeal to in this remote territory. "What do you want?" Miguel asked quietly, the defeat in his voice breaking Elena's heart. "Well, that depends," Garrett said, his gaze sliding to Elena. "See, investigations like this can take a long time. Months even. And while they're ongoing, suspects might need to be held in protective custody. Of course, sometimes cooperation from the family can speed things along." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Elena could feel her parents' anguish, their desperate desire to protect her warring with their knowledge that they were powerless against the corrupt authority Garrett represented. "What kind of cooperation?" Elena asked, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Garrett smiled, and Elena saw the predator behind the badge. The kind that shows real commitment to clearing up these misunderstandings. Personal guarantees of loyalty. Elena understood perfectly what he was suggesting, and she felt sick with rage and helplessness. This man was using his position of authority to extort her family, threatening them with imprisonment or worse unless she submitted to his advances. Before anyone could respond, another sound reached them, the thunder of approaching hooves, but this time from multiple directions. Elena's heart leaped with hope that James had finally returned, but as the riders emerged from the twilight, her hope turned to confusion and, then, to terror. The horsemen approaching from three sides were not cavalry soldiers. They wore paint and feathers, carried traditional weapons alongside stolen guns, and moved with the fluid grace of men born to the saddle. Comanche warriors, at least 20 of them, were surrounding the Martinez homestead. Elena heard her mother's strangled cry and saw her father reach for his rifle, but Garrett was already shouting orders to his men. "Indians, take cover!" But even as chaos erupted around her, Elena noticed something strange about the approaching warriors. They were not attacking with the wild fury she had heard described in countless stories of Comanche raids. Instead, they moved with deliberate precision, forming a perfect circle around the homestead, but making no aggressive moves beyond their intimidating presence. The lead warrior rode a magnificent black stallion and wore the regalia of a war chief. Even from a distance, Elena could see that he was a man of impressive stature, his bearing speaking of absolute authority among his people. But what struck her most was the way his attention seemed focused not on the armed men scrambling for defensive positions, but on her specifically. Garrett and his men had drawn their weapons, but Elena could see the fear in their eyes. They were outnumbered and surrounded, facing warriors whose reputation for combat prowess was legendary throughout the frontier. The corrupt Marshals' carefully laid plans were suddenly irrelevant in the face of a threat he had not anticipated. "Nobody move," Garrett shouted, though his voice cracked slightly. "We're lawmen on official business." The Comanche war chief urged his horse forward, stopping just outside easy rifle range. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the distance, and Elena was shocked to realize he was speaking in English. "Release the woman," he called out, his accent thick but his words unmistakable. "She is under our protection." Elena stared in complete bewilderment. She had never seen this man before in her life, had never had any contact with the Comanche beyond occasional glimpses of distant riders on the horizon. Yet this formidable warrior was claiming she was under his protection, risking himself and his men to confront armed lawmen on her behalf. Garrett raised his rifle, his hands shaking slightly. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but this woman is under arrest on charges of treason. She's coming with us." The war chief's laugh was cold and utterly without humor. "Your authority ends where my lance begins, white man. The woman comes with us, or you all die where you stand." Elena felt as though she were trapped in some kind of fever dream. The situation had gone from threatening to completely surreal in a matter of minutes. Two different groups of armed men were now claiming authority over her fate, and she found herself caught between the corrupt marshal who wanted to abuse her and the mysterious Comanche chief who claimed to be protecting her. Miguel stepped forward, his rifle forgotten in his hands as he stared at the surrounding warriors. Elena has done nothing wrong. She should not have to pay for crimes she did not commit or accept protection she does not understand. The war chief's attention shifted to Miguel, and Elena saw something like respect in his expression. Your daughter's honor is precious to her. It should be precious to those who claim to protect her as well. His words carried an implicit criticism of Garrett's intentions that was unmistakable even to the corrupt marshal. Elena realized that somehow this Comanche leader understood exactly what kind of threat Garrett represented to her. How do you know about my daughter? Miguel asked, his voice filled with confusion and growing suspicion. Before the war chief could answer, one of Garrett's deputies made a critical mistake. Whether from fear or desperation, he raised his rifle and fired at the nearest Comanche warrior. The shot went wild, but the hostile action shattered the tense standoff. Elena watched in horror as the peaceful confrontation exploded into violence. The Comanche warriors moved with deadly efficiency, their war cries piercing the evening air as they charged the defensive positions Garrett's men had hastily assumed. The corrupt marshal and his followers had weapons and cover, but they were hopelessly outnumbered and outfought by opponents who had been trained for warfare since childhood. Through the chaos, Elena saw the war chief riding directly toward her, his horse weaving between the flying bullets and arrows with supernatural grace. She stood frozen, uncertain whether he represented salvation or a different kind of doom. As he drew near, she could see his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his early 30s, with strong features and dark eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. There was something in his expression, determination mixed with what almost looked like recognition, that made her heart race for reasons she could not understand. Without breaking stride, he leaned down from his horse and extended his arm toward her. Elena Martinez, he said, and the sound of her name in his accented English sent shivers down her spine. You must come with me now. Elena hesitated for a crucial moment, torn between the known evil of Garrett's intentions and the unknown fate that awaited her with these warriors. But as she heard the marshal cursing and shooting behind her, she realized that her choice had been made for her by circumstances beyond her control. She grasped the war chief's outstretched arm and felt herself pulled up behind him on his horse with strength that took her breath away. As they wheeled away from the homestead, she caught a glimpse of her parents standing in their doorway, their faces etched with terror and helplessness as they watched their daughter disappear into the gathering darkness. The last thing Elena saw as the Comanche warriors melted away into the night was Marshal Garrett standing amid the wreckage of his plans, his face twisted with rage as he realized that his prey had been snatched away by forces beyond his control or understanding. As the thundering hooves carried her away from everything she had ever known, Elena found herself pressed against the back of a man whose very existence challenged everything she thought she understood about the world. Behind them, the lights of San Angelo grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared entirely, leaving her alone in the vast darkness of the Texas plains with a warrior whose motives remained as mysterious as the stars wheeling overhead. The Comanche camp materialized out of the darkness like something from a dream. Elena had been riding behind the war chief for what felt like hours, her arms wrapped around his waist as his powerful horse carried them across terrain that seemed impossible to navigate in the moonlight. Yet he had guided them through ravines and across streams with the confidence of someone who knew every rock and tree in this vast wilderness. As they crested a low hill, Elena saw the glow of fires scattered across a hidden valley below. Teepees stood in careful formation, their buffalo hide walls decorated with paintings that told stories she could not read. The sounds of the camp reached her, children's laughter, women's voices calling to each other, the occasional whinny of horses, creating a picture of community life that contradicted everything she had been taught about savage raiders. The war chief slowed his horse as they approached the camp, and Elena became aware of the curious stares following their progress. She felt exposed and vulnerable acutely conscious of how different she must appear among these people. Her simple cotton dress and braided hair marked her as clearly as a foreign language, and she wondered what they saw when they looked at her. Near the largest teepee in the center of the camp, the war chief finally brought his horse to a stop. He dismounted with fluid grace and then reached up to help Elena down, his hand strong and sure as they lifted her from the horse's back. For a moment they stood close together, and Elena found herself looking directly into his dark eyes, seeing intelligence and something else, a tenderness that surprised her. "Do not be afraid," he said softly, his English careful but clear. "You are safe here. No one will harm you." Elena wanted to ask him who he was, why he had rescued her, how he knew her name. But before she could speak, an older woman emerged from the large teepee. She was perhaps 50 years old, with graying hair braided with beads and feathers, wearing a dress made from the softest deerskin Elena had ever seen. Her face held the kind of dignity that comes from a lifetime of wisdom and respected authority. The woman spoke rapidly in Comanche to the war chief, her tone suggesting both concern and curiosity. He replied in the same language, gesturing toward Elena in a way that seemed protective rather than possessive. Elena caught her own name in the exchange and realized they were discussing her presence in the camp. Finally, the older woman turned to Elena and spoke in accented but fluent English. "I am Morningstar, mother of Iron Wolf. You are the one called Elena Martinez." Elena nodded, still struggling to process the surreal nature of her situation. "Yes, ma'am. I don't understand why I'm here or how you know my name." Morningstar exchanged a meaningful look with her son, for Elena now realized that Iron Wolf must be the war chief's name, before gesturing toward the teepee entrance. "Kulme, there are things you must learn, and the night grows cold." Inside the teepee, Elena found herself in a space that was both foreign and surprisingly welcoming. Buffalo robes covered the ground, and a small fire in the center provided warmth and light. The walls were decorated with weapons, artwork, and what appeared to be personal belongings that spoke of a rich cultural life. Iron Wolf took a position near the fire where he could watch both Elena and the entrance, his alert posture suggesting he was still ready to defend her if necessary. Morningstar settled across from Elena and began preparing what smelled like sage tea. For several minutes, no one spoke, and Elena used the time to study Iron Wolf more closely. In the firelight, she could see the strong lines of his face, the several scars that marked him as an experienced warrior, and the way he carried himself with the unconscious authority of someone accustomed to command. But she also noticed the careful way he avoided looking directly at her, as if her presence affected him in ways he was trying to conceal. "Elena Martinez," Morningstar finally said, handing her a cup of the aromatic tea. "You were promised to a cavalry officer named James Sullivan." Elena's heart clenched at the mention of James's name. "Yes, he's been gone for over a month on patrol. I've been worried about him." Iron Wolf spoke for the first time since they had entered the teepee, his voice carefully neutral. "Captain Sullivan is alive and well. His patrol encountered a band of Kiowa raiders 3 weeks ago. During the fighting, he was wounded, not seriously, but enough to slow his return." Elena felt a surge of relief, so intense it made her dizzy. "He's truly all right? You've seen him?" "I've spoken with him," Iron Wolf confirmed. "He asked me to ensure your safety until he can return to claim you as his wife." Elena stared at him in complete bewilderment. You know James? You've spoken with him? How is that possible?" Morningstar set down her own cup and leaned forward. "Elena, there are things about this land and its people that your settlement does not understand. Not all Comanche are raiders. Not all cavalry officers see us as enemies to be destroyed. Some men, both white and Indian, understand that survival requires cooperation rather than endless war." "I don't understand," Elena said, though she was beginning to suspect that her rescue had been far more complicated than a simple intervention. Iron Wolf was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire as if gathering his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of carefully guarded secrets. 3 years ago, I was wounded in a fight with Mexican raiders who had stolen horses from our herd. I was found by a cavalry patrol led by a young lieutenant named James Sullivan. He could have killed me or taken me prisoner. Instead, he saw that I was badly hurt and chose to help me. Elena listened in fascination as Iron Wolf continued his story, his voice growing stronger as he recalled details that clearly meant a great deal to him. Sullivan had his men make camp and tend my wounds. For 3 days, while I recovered enough to travel, we talked. He told me about his life, his beliefs, his hope that someday the fighting between our peoples could end. I told him about my people, our ways, our desire to live in peace on the land we love. Morning Star added softly. From that meeting grew an understanding between Iron Wolf and Captain Sullivan. They began to meet in secret, sharing information that helped prevent raids and counter-raids, finding ways to protect both our people and the white settlers. Elena felt as though her entire understanding of the world was shifting. James never told me any of this. He could not, Iron Wolf explained. There are those among your people who would consider such cooperation treason, and there are those among mine who would see it as betrayal. We have had to be very careful. But why did you rescue me tonight? How did you know I was in danger? Iron Wolf's expression darkened. Sullivan asked me to watch over you while he was away. He knew that Marshal Garrett was a dangerous man who used his badge to prey upon the innocent. When my scouts reported that Garrett had increased his pressure on your family, I knew the time had come to act. Elena realized that the mysterious bond between Iron Wolf and James explained so much about her rescue. But it also raised new questions about the relationship between the two men and what it might mean for her future. James asked you to protect me, she said slowly, trying to understand the implications. But you risked your life and the lives of your warriors to face down armed lawmen. Why would you do such a thing for someone you don't even know? The question hung in the air between them, and Elena saw something flicker in Iron Wolf's eyes, an emotion quickly suppressed, but not before she caught a glimpse of it. Morning Star was watching her son carefully, and Elena sensed there was more to this story than she had yet heard. Iron Wolf rose abruptly and moved toward the teepee entrance. You should rest. Tomorrow I will escort you to a place where you can meet Sullivan safely. This matter will be resolved. But Elena was not ready to let the subject drop. Something in Iron Wolf's manner, in the way he avoided her eyes when speaking about her, suggested that his motives for rescuing her were more complex than simple friendship with James. Iron Wolf, she called softly as he reached the entrance. Please, I need to understand what's really happening here. He paused without turning around, his shoulders tense. You need only understand that you are safe and will soon be reunited with the man you love. Nothing else matters. But his words carried an undertone of pain that contradicted their meaning. Elena looked at Morning Star, hoping for clarification, and saw sympathy in the older woman's eyes. After Iron Wolf left the teepee, Morning Star was quiet for several minutes, seeming to weigh her words carefully. Finally, she spoke in a voice so soft Elena had to lean forward to hear her. My son is a good man, Elena Martinez. He has always been honorable, always placed the welfare of his people above his own desires. But he is also human, and the heart does not always follow the path that honor demands. Elena felt her pulse quicken. What are you saying? I am saying that when Iron Wolf first told me of his meetings with Captain Sullivan, he spoke only of politics and peace negotiations. But after several months, his reports began to include details about Sullivan's life that seemed unnecessary for diplomatic purposes. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she set down her teacup. What kind of details? Details about the woman Sullivan loved. Her name, her appearance, her character, her dreams for the future. At first I thought Iron Wolf was simply being thorough in his intelligence gathering. But as time passed, I began to understand that his interest in Elena Martinez was becoming more personal than professional. Elena felt as though she could not breathe properly. He's never even met me. But he has watched you from a distance, Morning Star said gently. Many times, when he came to the area to meet with Sullivan, he would observe your settlement. He told himself it was for security purposes, to ensure no one discovered their meetings. But I think it was really because he wanted to see the woman who had captured Sullivan's heart so completely. Elena's mind reeled with the implications of what she was hearing. The noble Comanche warrior who had risked everything to save her was harboring feelings for a woman promised to his friend and ally. The complexity of the situation was staggering. Does James know how Iron Wolf feels about me? She asked. I believe Sullivan suspects something, though my son has never spoken of it directly. It is one of the reasons their friendship has become strained in recent months. Iron Wolf has withdrawn from their meetings, claiming increased hostility from other tribes makes contact too dangerous. But I think the real reason is that seeing Sullivan's happiness has become too painful for him to bear. Elena sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything she had learned. Her rescue had not been a random act of heroism or even a simple favor to James. It had been the desperate action of a man who could not bear to see the woman he loved destroyed by corrupt authority, even though that woman belonged to another. "I never knew," she whispered. "I had no idea he even existed until tonight." "How could you know?" Morningstar asked gently. "You live in a world where my people are seen only as enemies to be destroyed. The idea that one of our warriors could fall in love with a white woman from a distance, could suffer in silence while watching her prepare to marry his friend, such things are not part of your people's understanding." Elena thought about Iron Wolf's behavior throughout the evening. His protective stance, the careful way he avoided looking at her directly, the pain she had glimpsed in his eyes when he spoke of returning her to James. Everything made sense now, and her heart ached for the impossible situation he had created for himself. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you sleep," Morningstar said firmly. "Tomorrow my son will escort you to meet Captain Sullivan, and you will be married as planned. Iron Wolf will return to his people, and perhaps in time, the pain in his heart will ease." But even as Morningstar spoke these words, Elena could hear the uncertainty in her voice. The older woman clearly loved her son and understood his suffering, but she also recognized that there were no easy solutions to the dilemma he faced. As Elena lay down on the buffalo robes that Morningstar provided, she found herself staring at the ceiling of the teepee, her mind racing with thoughts she had never expected to have. Just hours ago, her greatest worry had been Marshal Garrett's threats and James's delayed return. Now she found herself thinking about a man who had fallen in love with her from a distance, who had risked his life to save her, and who was prepared to give her up to his friend because honor demanded it. Outside the teepee, she could hear the sounds of the camp settling down for the night. Somewhere among those sounds were Iron Wolf's footsteps, and Elena found herself wondering what thoughts were keeping him awake under the stars. Did he regret saving her, knowing it would only increase his pain? Or was he grateful for the chance to have spoken with her, even briefly, before returning her to the life she was meant to live? Elena had always believed that love was simple, that when you found the right person, everything else fell into place naturally. But now she understood that love could be complicated, painful, and impossible all at once. Tomorrow she would see James again and presumably become his wife as planned. But tonight, she lay in a Comanche teepee thinking about a warrior whose name she had not known that morning, and wondering why the thought of never seeing him again filled her with an inexplicable sense of loss. The fire in the center of the teepee gradually died down to glowing embers, and still Elena lay awake, her heart torn between the safe, predictable future she had planned and the dangerous, impossible feelings that Iron Wolf's sacrifice had awakened in her soul. Dawn came slowly to the hidden valley, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. Elena awoke to the sound of children's voices and the smell of cooking fires, momentarily confused by her surroundings before the memories of the previous night came flooding back. She was in a Comanche camp, under the protection of a warrior named Iron Wolf who had fallen in love with her from a distance, preparing to be reunited with James Sullivan, the man she was supposed to marry. Morningstar was already awake, tending the fire and preparing what smelled like some kind of cornmeal porridge. She looked up as Elena stirred, offering a gentle smile that helped ease the disorientation of waking in such an unfamiliar place. "Did you sleep well?" Morningstar asked, handing Elena a bowl of the warm food. "Not really," Elena admitted, accepting the bowl gratefully. She was surprised to find that the porridge was flavored with berries and honey, making it far more palatable than she expected. "I kept thinking about everything you told me last night." Morningstar nodded understandingly. Knowledge can be a burden as well as a gift. Sometimes ignorance is more comfortable than truth. Before Elena could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Through the teepee entrance, Elena could see Iron Wolf riding into camp with two of his warriors. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in his posture, the way he scanned the surrounding hills as if expecting trouble. He dismounted near their teepee and spoke briefly with his companions in rapid Comanche before approaching the entrance. When Morningstar called for him to enter, Elena felt her heart race in a way that confused and alarmed her. In the morning light, Iron Wolf seemed even more imposing than he had the night before. His dark hair was braided with small feathers and beads, and war paint decorated his face in patterns that spoke of his status as a war chief. But it was his eyes that captured Elena's attention, dark and intense, holding depths of emotion that he was struggling to conceal. "Captain Sullivan is approaching," he said without preamble, his English formal and careful. "He will be here within the hour. You should prepare to leave with him." Elena felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment at his words. Relief because she would soon see James again and know that he was truly safe. Disappointment because it meant her time with Iron Wolf was about to end, and she was shocked to realize how much that prospect saddened her. "Is James alone?" she asked, trying to focus on practical matters. "He comes with 2 soldiers he trusts completely. Men who understand the need for discretion regarding our cooperation." Iron Wolf's voice was steady, but Elena could see the effort it took for him to maintain his composure. Morningstar rose and gathered several items from around the teepee: a brush made from porcupine quills, a small mirror, and a clean piece of cloth. "Elena, you should make yourself ready to see your betrothed. He will want to see you looking well and unharmed." Elena accepted the items and moved to a corner of the teepee to tidy her appearance. Her dress was wrinkled from sleeping in it, and her hair had come loose from its braids during the night's ride. As she worked to make herself presentable, she was acutely aware of Iron Wolf's presence behind her, the way the air in the teepee seemed charged with unspoken tension. "Iron Wolf," she said quietly as she braided her hair, not turning around to face him. "I want to thank you for what you did. I know you risked your life and the lives of your warriors to save me from Marshal Garrett. Any honorable man would have done the same," he replied, but his voice carried an undertone that suggested his motives were not as simple as honor. Elena finished with her hair and turned to face him, finding him staring intently into the fire as if trying to find answers in the flames. "Would any honorable man have done the same? Or was there something more personal in your decision to help me?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Iron Wolf's jaw tightened, and Elena could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. Finally, he looked up and met her eyes directly for the first time since she had entered his camp. "Your mother told me what you said last night," Elena continued, her voice gentle but determined. "About how you've watched me from a distance, how you know details about my life that James shared with you. I need to understand what this means." Iron Wolf rose abruptly, his movement sharp and angry. "It means nothing. It changes nothing. You were promised to Sullivan, and he is a good man who loves you. That is all that matters." But Elena could see the pain behind his words, the way his hands clenched at his sides, as if he were fighting the urge to reach for something he could never have. She stood as well, moving closer to him despite the warning voice in her head that told her this was dangerous territory. "It means something to me," she said softly. "A man doesn't risk everything for a woman who means nothing to him." Iron Wolf turned away from her, his shoulders rigid with tension. "You do not understand our ways, Elena Martinez. Among my people, a warrior's honor is everything. I gave my word to Sullivan that I would protect you. That is the only reason I acted." "Is it?" Elena challenged, moving to stand in front of him so he could not avoid her gaze. "Look me in the eyes and tell me that you risked 20 warriors and your own life simply because you gave your word to a friend." For a moment, their eyes met and held, and Elena saw the truth burning in Iron Wolf's dark gaze. She saw months of suppressed longing, of watching her from a distance and imagining what it would be like to speak with her, to know her thoughts and dreams. She saw the agony of falling in love with a woman he could never have, bound by honor to help her marry another man. "Elena," he said hoarsely, her name sounding like a prayer on his lips. "Please do not ask me to speak of things that can never be." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses broke the tension between them. Iron Wolf immediately stepped back, his warrior's training taking over as he moved to the teepee entrance to assess the approaching riders. "Sullivan comes," he announced, his voice once again carefully controlled. "You should go to meet him." Elena felt as though her world were spinning out of control. In the space of a few minutes, she had glimpsed the depths of Iron Wolf's feelings for her, and felt her own heart respond in ways that terrified her. She was supposed to be overjoyed at the prospect of seeing James again, ready to throw herself into his arms and become his wife. Instead, she felt torn between two men who represented completely different futures for her. Morning Star appeared at Elena's side, placing a gentle hand on her arm. "Come, child. Captain Sullivan has traveled far to find you safe. Do not keep him waiting." Elena allowed herself to be guided from the teepee, but her mind remained focused on Iron Wolf, who followed behind them with the measured pace of a man walking to his own execution. Outside, she could see 3 riders approaching the camp from the east, and, even at a distance, she could recognize James's familiar figure. The camp had come alive with curious observers, warriors, and women and children gathering to witness this unusual meeting between their war chief and a cavalry officer. Elena realized that Iron Wolf was taking a significant risk by allowing James into the heart of his camp, trusting not only in their personal friendship, but in the discretion of his own people. As James drew near, Elena could see the relief and joy on his face. He looked older than when she had last seen him, with new lines around his eyes and a healing scar on his left temple that spoke of the fight Iron Wolf had mentioned. But his smile was the same warm, genuine expression that had first attracted her to him months ago. James dismounted and handed his reins to one of his soldiers, then strode toward Elena with the eager steps of a man reunited with his beloved. She found herself moving toward him as well, drawn by habit and genuine affection, but she was disturbed to realize that her heart was not racing with the same excitement she had expected to feel. "Elena," James breathed as he reached her, pulling her into his arms with desperate relief. "Thank God you're safe. Well, I got word about what happened with Garrett. I was terrified I would be too late." Elena allowed herself to be held, taking comfort in James's familiar embrace, while her mind struggled to process the conflicting emotions warring in her chest. She was glad to see him safe and whole, grateful that his mission had not ended in disaster as she had feared. But she was also acutely aware of Iron Wolf watching their reunion from a respectful distance, his face a mask of stoic control that could not entirely hide his pain. "I'm all right," Elena murmured against James's shoulder. "Iron Wolf and his warriors rescued me just in time. Garrett was going to arrest my family on false charges unless I—" She could not finish the sentence, could not speak aloud the corrupt Marshals' demands. James's arms tightened around her, and she could feel the anger radiating from his body. "I should have been there to protect you. I should never have left you alone for so long. You had your duty," Elena said, pulling back to look at his face. "And Iron Wolf fulfilled his promise to you. He kept me safe when you could not." James turned toward Iron Wolf, and Elena saw a complex mix of emotions cross his face: gratitude, respect, and what looked like a dawning understanding of something he had perhaps suspected but not wanted to acknowledge. "Iron Wolf, my friend," James said, approaching the Comanche chief with his hand extended. "I owe you a debt I can never repay. You risked everything to save the woman I love." Iron Wolf clasped James's hand, but Elena could see the cost of that simple gesture in the tightness around his eyes. "She is precious to you. That made her precious to me as well." The words were carefully chosen to convey friendship and loyalty, but Elena heard the deeper truth behind them. Iron Wolf was essentially telling James that he understood how much Elena meant to him because he had come to feel the same way. James must have heard it too, because Elena saw his expression change subtly. He looked between Iron Wolf and Elena with the growing awareness of a man beginning to understand a situation he had not previously recognized. "We should discuss the matter of Marshal Garrett," Iron Wolf said, clearly eager to move the conversation to safer ground. "He will not give up his pursuit of Elena easily. The false charges he has manufactured will not disappear simply because she is no longer within his reach." James nodded, though Elena could see that his attention was divided between the practical matters Iron Wolf raised and the personal dynamics he was beginning to perceive. "You're right. Garrett will claim that Elena was abducted by hostile Indians, possibly killed. It gives him an excuse to organize a search party or even call in additional cavalry units. More than that," Iron Wolf continued, "he will use her supposed death to justify increased military action against all Indian tribes in the region. My people will suffer for the crime of protecting her." Elena felt a chill as she realized the full implications of her rescue. In saving her from Garrett's immediate threat, Iron Wolf had potentially brought disaster down upon his entire tribe. The corrupt marshal would twist the truth to serve his own purposes, using Elena's disappearance as justification for the kind of military campaign that could destroy the Comanche way of life. "There has to be a solution," Elena said, looking between the two men who had both risked so much for her safety. "Some way to expose Garrett's corruption without bringing the army down on your people." James was quiet for several moments, clearly working through possibilities in his mind. "There's one way," he said finally, "but it would require Elena to return with me to San Angelo and face Garrett directly. With witnesses and proper documentation, we might be able to expose his corruption and clear both Elena and Iron Wolf's people of any wrongdoing." Iron Wolf shook his head immediately. "Too dangerous. Garrett has already shown he is willing to commit crimes to get what he wants. Putting Elena within his reach again would be foolish." "I'm not afraid of Garrett," Elena said, though her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "If exposing him is the only way to protect your people, then I'll do whatever is necessary." Both men turned to look at her with expressions of protective concern that would have been amusing under different circumstances. Elena realized that she was caught between two men who both loved her enough to die for her, and the weight of that knowledge was almost overwhelming. "There may be another way," Iron Wolf said slowly, as if the idea were forming even as he spoke. "But it would require Elena to make a choice that would change her life forever." Elena felt her heart stop. "What kind of choice?" Iron Wolf looked directly at her for the first time since James's arrival, and in his eyes she saw a desperate hope that he was trying to suppress. "Among my people, a woman who takes refuge with a warrior's tribe can claim the right of protection marriage. It is an old custom, rarely used, but it would make you legally my wife under Comanche law. Garrett could not touch you, and any attack on my people would be seen as an act of war against a cavalry officer's family." The silence that followed his words was deafening. Elena stared at Iron Wolf in shock, while James processed the implications of what his friend had just suggested. The solution was elegant in its simplicity, but it would require Elena to choose between the safe, familiar future she had planned with James and an uncertain life with a man she barely knew but who had somehow captured her heart. Elena would never agree to such a thing, James said quietly, but Elena could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "She loves me. We're planning to be married." Iron Wolf's gaze never left Elena's face. "The choice must be hers alone. I offer protection, not because I expect her to accept, but because honor demands I give her the option." Elena felt as though she were standing at the edge of a precipice, looking down into an abyss that might lead to either destruction or a kind of freedom she had never imagined. Behind her lay the safe, predictable life she had planned with James, a life of respect and security in the Anglo community she had always known. Ahead lay the unknown territory of life with Iron Wolf, a life that would cut her off from her own people, but might offer her a depth of passion and adventure she was only beginning to understand. The choice that would determine the rest of her life hung in the air between them, waiting for her answer. Elena stood between the two men who had shaped her destiny, her heart torn between duty and desire, between the safe path and the unknown future. The entire Comanche camp seemed to hold its breath as they waited for her decision. Even the children had fallen silent, sensing the gravity of the moment that would determine not just Elena's fate, but the delicate balance of peace that Iron Wolf and James had worked so carefully to maintain. James stepped closer to her, his face pale with the realization that he might lose the woman he loved to his closest ally. "Elena, you don't have to do this. We can find another way to deal with Garrett. I won't let you sacrifice yourself out of some misguided sense of obligation." But Elena could see the fear in his eyes, the dawning understanding that her feelings might be more complex than he had assumed. In all their months of courtship, he had never questioned her love for him, never imagined that another man could capture her heart. Now he was faced with the possibility that the woman he thought he knew completely had been changed by a single night in the company of a Comanche warrior. Iron Wolf remained silent, his dark eyes fixed on Elena's face with an intensity that made her feel as though he could see into her very soul. He had made his offer, stated his case, and now he waited with the patience of a man who understood that true love could not be forced or demanded, only freely given. Elena closed her eyes and tried to find clarity in the chaos of her emotions. She thought about the life she had planned with James, comfortable, respectable, surrounded by people who shared her language and customs. She would be a cavalry officer's wife, respected in the community, raising children who would grow up with every advantage the frontier could offer. But she also thought about the way her heart had raced when Iron Wolf first spoke her name, the way his presence made her feel alive and aware in ways she had never experienced. She thought about his willingness to risk everything for her safety, his quiet strength, and the depth of emotion she saw in his eyes when he looked at her. Most importantly, she thought about the kind of love she wanted to build her life upon. James loved her with the steady affection of a man who appreciated her qualities and saw her as a suitable partner for the life he wanted to live. It was a good love, a practical love, but it lacked the fire that she now understood was possible between a man and woman. Iron Wolf loved her with the desperate passion of a man who had watched her from a distance and built his dreams around a woman he thought he could never have. He had risked his life, his people's safety, and his friendship with James for the chance to save her. That kind of love was dangerous and unpredictable, but it was also the kind of love that songs were written about and legends were built upon. Elena opened her eyes and found both men watching her with expressions of barely controlled anguish. She realized that no matter what choice she made, someone would be hurt deeply. The knowledge that her decision would cause pain to a good man made her heart ache, but she also understood that she could not sacrifice her own happiness to spare someone else's feelings. "James," she said softly, turning toward the man she had promised to marry. "You are a good man, an honorable man, and I have cared for you deeply. But I cannot marry you knowing that my heart belongs to another." James's face crumpled with pain, but he straightened his shoulders and met her gaze with the dignity of a man who had always tried to do the right thing. "I see. And your heart belongs to Iron Wolf." Elena looked at the Comanche warrior who had changed her entire understanding of love in the space of a single night. "I don't know if what I feel is love. We've known each other for such a short time. But I know that when I think about spending my life with him, I feel something I've never felt before. Hope, excitement, the possibility of a love that could grow stronger with every passing year." Iron Wolf stepped forward, his usual stoic composure cracking to reveal the depth of his emotion. "Elena Martinez, if you choose to stay with me, I promise you will never regret your decision. I will love you with all the strength I possess, protect you with my life, and honor you for as long as I draw breath." Elena felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she looked between the two men. "James, I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I never meant to hurt you." James was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched at his sides as he struggled with emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with pain, but steady with resolve. "Elena, if Iron Wolf makes you happy in ways that I cannot, then I will not stand in your way. I love you enough to want you to have the life that will bring you the greatest joy, even if that life is not with me." The nobility of his words made Elena's tears flow even harder. She stepped toward James and placed her hand gently on his arm. "You will always be special to me, James. Always. And someday you will find a woman who can love you the way you deserve to be loved." James covered her hand with his own, squeezing gently before releasing her. "Perhaps. But right now, all I can think about is making sure you're safe. Garrett is still out there, and choosing to stay with Iron Wolf will not end the threat he represents." Iron Wolf moved to Elena's side, and she felt the strength of his presence like a warm cloak around her shoulders. "Garrett will not be a problem much longer. I have sent word to the territorial governor about his activities, along with evidence of his corruption that will be difficult to deny." Elena looked at him in surprise. "What kind of evidence?" "The kind that comes from months of careful observation and documentation. My scouts have been watching Garrett for some time, recording his illegal activities, his extortion attempts, his abuse of authority. When this information reaches the proper authorities, accompanied by testimony from respected citizens, Garrett's career will be finished." James nodded slowly, his military mind appreciating the strategic thinking behind Iron Wolf's approach. "You've been planning this for a while." "I have been planning to protect Elena since the first time Sullivan spoke of his love for her," Iron Wolf admitted. "I knew that men like Garrett would eventually target her because of her beauty and her vulnerability as a Mexican woman in Anglo territory. I have been preparing to eliminate that threat long before it became immediate." Elena felt a new wave of emotion as she understood the depth of Iron Wolf's devotion to her. Even when he believed she would marry James, he had been working to ensure her safety and happiness. That kind of selfless love was something she had never experienced before. There's something else, Iron Wolf continued. The marriage ceremony I spoke of, it would not be binding under territorial law unless you chose to make it so. You could live as my wife among my people while remaining legally free to change your mind if you ever wish to return to your former life. Elena stared at him in amazement. Even in offering her his protection and his love, he was ensuring that she retained the power to choose her own destiny. No man had ever treated her with such complete respect for her autonomy. You would do that? She asked. You would take the risk that I might leave you? Iron Wolf's smile was soft and full of tenderness. Elena, I fell in love with your spirit long before I ever spoke with you. That spirit includes your independence, your strength, your refusal to be controlled by anyone. I will not try to cage something so beautiful. I would rather love you freely for whatever time you chose to stay than possess you against your will forever. Elena felt her heart swell with emotion so intense it took her breath away. This man understood her in ways that no one else ever had. He saw her not as a possession to be acquired or a prize to be won, but as a complete person worthy of love and respect. She turned to face the gathered members of Iron Wolf's tribe, people who had welcomed her despite her foreign appearance and unfamiliar ways. Morning Star stood nearby, her face glowing with joy as she witnessed her son's happiness. The warriors who had risked their lives to rescue her watched with expressions of approval and acceptance. If I stay, Elena said, addressing Morning Star, will your people accept me? Will they teach me your ways and help me build a life here? Morning Star stepped forward and took Elena's hands in her own. Child, you have already shown courage and wisdom beyond your years. Any woman who can inspire such devotion in my son, who can make such a difficult choice with such grace, is worthy to be called daughter. We will welcome you with open hearts. Elena felt the last of her doubts melting away. She had found not just a man to love, but a people who would embrace her as family. The life she was choosing would be challenging, learning new customs, adapting to a completely different way of living, facing the disapproval of her own people. But it would also be rich with possibilities she had never imagined. She turned back to Iron Wolf, her decision finally clear in her heart. I choose you, she said simply. I choose this life, these people, and whatever future we can build together. Iron Wolf's face transformed with joy, so radiant it seemed to illuminate the entire camp. He stepped toward her, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body, and spoke in a voice rough with emotion. Elena Martinez, you have made me the happiest man in all the territory. I swear to you, by everything I hold sacred, that you will never regret this choice. As if responding to some invisible signal, the camp erupted in celebration. Warriors hooped and fired rifles into the air, women began singing traditional songs, and children danced around the central fire that someone had built up to a roaring blaze. It was a spontaneous outpouring of joy that welcomed Elena into her new life with overwhelming warmth. James stood apart from the celebration, his face a mask of pain that he was trying valiantly to conceal. Elena approached him one final time, wanting to ensure that their parting was as gentle as possible. James, I hope someday you can forgive me for hurting you. James straightened his shoulders and managed a smile that was only slightly forced. Elena, there is nothing to forgive. You have chosen to follow your heart, and I respect that choice even if I don't like it. I hope Iron Wolf realizes what a treasure he has won. He does, Elena said softly, and I hope you realize that you deserve to find a love that makes you as happy as I am right now. James mounted his horse and gathered his reins, preparing to ride away from the woman he had loved and lost. Take care of yourself, Elena, and remember that you will always have friends in the cavalry if you ever need help. As James and his soldiers rode away from the Comanche camp, Elena felt the last connection to her old life fade into the distance. She was now completely committed to the new path she had chosen, with no way back to the safety and familiarity of her previous existence. Iron Wolf appeared at her side, his hand finding hers with gentle warmth. Are you ready to begin your new life, Elena Martinez? Elena looked around at the faces surrounding her, faces that had been strangers that morning but now represented her new family and community. She thought about the challenges ahead, the language she would need to learn, the customs she would need to master, the prejudices she would face from both sides of the cultural divide. But she also thought about the love she saw in Iron Wolf's eyes, the acceptance she had found among his people, and the sense of belonging that was already beginning to take root in her heart. "I'm ready," she said, squeezing his hand tightly. "I'm ready for all of it." That evening, as the celebration continued around them, Elena and Iron Wolf stood at the edge of the camp looking out over the vast expanse of the Texas plains. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and the wind carried the scent of sage and promise across the grassland. "Do you miss them already?" Iron Wolf asked softly, referring to her family and former life. Elena considered the question honestly. "I miss my parents, and I worry about their safety. But I don't miss the life I was leaving behind. I think I've been waiting my whole life for this feeling, this sense that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Iron Wolf pulled her closer, his arm warm and protective around her shoulders. "Tomorrow we will ride to your family's home, so you can tell them of your choice and ensure their safety from Garrett's threats. They need to know that you are happy and that this decision was yours alone." Elena felt a rush of gratitude for his thoughtfulness. "Will they understand? Will they be able to accept what I've done? Your father is a wise man who loves you. He will see the happiness in your eyes and know that you have chosen well. And if anyone questions your decision, they will have to answer to me." Elena smiled at the protective note in his voice. "I can fight my own battles, you know. I'm stronger than I look." Iron Wolf's laugh was rich and warm in the darkness. "I know exactly how strong you are, Elena Martinez. It is one of the things I love most about you. But that does not mean you have to fight those battles alone anymore." As they stood together under the vast Texas sky, Elena realized that she had found something she had not even known she was searching for. She had found a man who loved her not despite her strength and independence, but because of them. She had found a people who would welcome her as family while allowing her to remain true.